I inherited $1.8 million from a great aunt I'd met exactly twice. And for 4 months I told no one. Not my mother. Not my older sister. Not even my cousin who I used to share a bedroom with until I was 17. No one. The only person who knew was my coworker, well, former coworker, Serafina. And the reason she knew wasn't because I chose to tell her. It's because she was the only person who showed up the night I needed someone when I had nothing left to offer anybody. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is not important. What matters is that I was 31 years old, working as a licensed practical nurse at a long-term care facility in Akron, Ohio, making $22.40 an hour, eating a lot of frozen meals, and driving a 2014 Honda Civic with a heating system that worked about 60% of the time. I shared a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate I found on Facebook Marketplace. I had $3,200 in my checking account, about $900 in savings, and $34,000 in student loans that I thought about every single morning when I woke up. I was not struggling in a dramatic way. I wasn't behind on rent. I wasn't going hungry. But I was the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. The kind that comes from working night shifts and then going home to a life that feels like it's still waiting to start. My family, on the other hand, had very clear opinions about the fact that my life hadn't started yet. My mother lived 40 minutes away and called every Sunday, not to check on me, but to update me on everything I was doing wrong. I wasn't married. I didn't own property. I had chosen nursing over the accounting degree she'd wanted for me, and she brought that up with the consistency of someone who had set a recurring calendar reminder. My older sister, who I'll call by what she was to me, just my sister, had married a man with a good salary and lived in a house with a finished basement, and she treated that fact like a personality. Some of us made smarter choices, she told me once when I mentioned I was picking up an extra shift to cover a car repair. She wasn't being cruel exactly, she genuinely believed it. That was almost worse. My cousin Rhett was the one I'd been closest to growing up. We were the same age, had grown up spending summers at my grandmother's house, had shared 1,000 small stupid memories that feel enormous when you're a kid, but somewhere in our mid-20s, Rhett had gotten very interested in money, specifically in other people's perception of how much money he had, and our closeness had quietly dissolved. He called when he needed something. Otherwise, I mostly heard about him from my mother. And then there was my great-aunt Winifred. I had met her at a family reunion when I was 9, and then again at my grandmother's funeral when I was 24. She was my grandmother's older sister, which made her ancient by the time I saw her the second time, small and sharp-eyed and completely uninterested in small talk. We spoke for maybe 20 minutes at the reception. She asked me what I did. I told her I was finishing my nursing program and she said, very plainly, "Good, that's real work." Then she went and sat down and I never saw her again. She died in February. I didn't find out until a lawyer called me in March. Winifred had never married, had no children, had lived alone in a house in western Pennsylvania for the last 40 years of her life, working as a bookkeeper, saving obsessively, investing quietly. The lawyer's voice was calm and professional when he told me the number, but my hand went completely numb holding the phone. I sat down on the bathroom floor. I don't even remember walking there, and just stayed there for a while staring at the grout between the tiles. $1.8 million. Left entirely to me. The lawyer explained there would be paperwork, a process, a few months before anything transferred. He explained the tax implications. He recommended I find a financial advisor. I said okay, and yes, and I understand, at what I hoped were the right intervals. After I hung up, I sat on that bathroom floor for another 20 minutes, and then I got up, washed my face, and went to my shift. I told no one. I want to explain why, because it sounds strange. Most people's instinct when something enormous happens is to call someone. I understand that, but I knew my family, and I knew what that phone call would do. I had watched what happened when my uncle got a small inheritance from his father, maybe $30,000, and how my mother had spent 6 months relitigating every family slight in the context of who deserved what. I had watched my sister's face at Christmas when she found out Rhett had gotten a bonus at work. I had watched the way money moved through my family like weather, fast, disorganizing, leaving damage behind. $1.8 million would not bring out the best in these people. I was certain of it, so I called the lawyer back, asked him what I needed to do to keep things quiet during the probate process, and I went to work. I did my shifts. I ate my frozen meals. I kept the secret like a second job. The only crack in my composure came about 6 weeks later. I was in the break room at work. The old job before I eventually made some changes. And Serafina was there, eating a container of soup she'd brought from home, reading something on her phone. She was a few years older than me, had been at the facility longer, and we were friendly in the way you get friendly with someone when you've shared enough exhausted 3 a.m. moments in a fluorescent lit break room. We weren't close. We didn't hang out outside of work. But she was one of those people who had a quality I can only describe as steadiness. She never performed anything. She was just exactly what she appeared to be. She looked up, saw my face, and said, "What happened?" Not a question. Just a statement, like she was reading something off a page. I meant to say nothing, I'm fine. I don't know what actually came out, but within about 4 minutes I had told her everything. The lawyer, the number, Winifred, the bathroom floor, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Are you going to be okay?" Not, "Oh my God," or "What are you going to do with it all," or "You should invest in." Just, "Are you going to be okay?" I said I thought so. She nodded, finished her soup. And that was it. She never brought it up again at work, never treated me differently. For the next several weeks, she was just Serafina, same as always. Except now she was carrying a secret of mine. I didn't fully understand what that meant until the night of the ice storm. It was late November. The probate process was nearly complete. The money would actually be mine within the month, which still didn't feel real. And I was driving home from a double shift on roads that had gone from wet to treacherous somewhere around mile 4 of my drive. I felt the car lose traction before I fully understood what was happening, and then the Civic was sideways in a ditch on the side of Route 18. Airbag deployed, my head ringing, my hands shaking against the steering wheel. I was okay. Bruised, shaken, but okay. The car was not. I called my mother first because she was closest. She picked up on the third ring and I explained what happened. "I'm in a ditch, I'm okay, I need a ride." And there was a pause and she said, "It's 11:30. Do you know what time it is? Can't you call a tow truck?" I said the tow truck would take the car, but I still needed a way home. She said she'd see, and then said she had to go because she had her book club in the morning and needed her sleep. And she hung up. I called my sister. Voicemail. I called Rhett, who picked up immediately, and then when I explained, said he was really sorry, but the roads were terrible, and honestly I should just wait for the tow truck and then maybe call a lift, like he was offering a helpful suggestion to a stranger. I said the roads were too bad for a lift and I wasn't sure any would come out this far. He said, "Yeah, that's tough," and ended the call about 30 seconds later. I sat in my sideways car in a ditch in the middle of an ice storm for a few minutes, listening to sleet hit the windows, feeling something I can only describe as a very cold, very clear understanding of exactly where I stood. Then I texted Serafina. I didn't even plan to. She wasn't who I'd thought to call first, or second, or third. But she was who I texted because she was, apparently, who I trusted. She replied in under 2 minutes. "Where exactly are you? I'm coming." She lived 45 minutes away. She drove out in the ice storm, found me, helped me deal with the tow truck, drove me all the way home, and when I tried to thank her, she waved it off like it was nothing. Like of course she'd driven 45 minutes in an ice storm at midnight. Like that was just a thing people did for each other. I sat in her car on the way home and thought about my mother's voice. "It's 11:30. Do you know what time it is?" And then I thought about Serafina pulling up on that icy road with her hazard lights on. I thought about those two things for a long time. The money transferred in December. I met with a financial advisor, someone the lawyer recommended, not anyone my family knew. And I made a plan. I bought a modest house, I paid off my loans, I set aside investments. I kept living, more or less, the way I had been living, because I wasn't sure yet what I wanted to change. And I'd learned from watching my family that urgency around money makes people do foolish things. I still told no one. My mother called on Sundays. My sister texted occasionally, usually when she wanted to complain about something. Rhett surfaced around the holidays and was perfectly pleasant and completely hollow. My family continued to exist in the way they always had, at a certain distance, with a certain weight, in the particular way of people you love, because you have to, and not always because you choose to. Then, January happened. My sister called on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual. Her voice had that careful brightness that meant she was about to ask for something. She said she and her husband were thinking about refinancing and they'd found this investment opportunity. And they were a little short and she was wondering, just a loan, she'd pay it back. Could I help with about $15,000? I asked her when she'd ever loaned me $15, let alone $15,000. I said it nicely. She laughed in that way she had, the dismissive laugh, and said I was being dramatic and that family helped each other. And didn't I have some savings? I said I'd think about it. I didn't call her back. 3 weeks later, my mother brought it up. I'd apparently been discussed. She said my sister was going through a hard time and it wouldn't kill me to be generous since I didn't have anyone to spend money on anyway. A reference to the fact that I was single, delivered with the lightness of a comment she'd made 1,000 times and never once reconsidered. I said I'd think about it. My mother said she hoped I would because family was family. Rhett called in February. He'd heard I'd come into some money. I didn't know how, except that these things leak. And he had an idea for a business he'd been developing, a supplement line, really incredible margins. He'd been working on it for a while. All he needed was a partner with capital. I told him I'd think about it. I didn't call him back. And the whole time, Serafina knew exactly how much money I had, and she had never once asked me for anything. I want to tell you about the conversation I had with Serafina in March, about 4 months after the ice storm, because it's the part I think about most. We'd gotten into the habit of getting coffee on Thursday mornings before our shifts. Nothing planned. It had just evolved, the way things do when you keep choosing the same person's company. I told her about the calls from my family. She listened, which was what she did, and when I was done she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know. She said, "I think you do." She wasn't wrong. I'd known for a while, the way you know things you're not ready to say out loud. My family had shown me, with a consistency that almost deserved to be admired, exactly who they were when I had nothing to offer. My mother had told me that my being sick was not her problem. Those were her actual words, approximately, about a small thing that had happened with a prescription situation a year earlier, that I hadn't even included in this account because it seemed almost too on the nose. My sister had called to borrow money before she'd called to ask how I was doing. Rhett wanted a business partner, not a cousin. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strange thing. I was just done. I also knew that I wanted to do something for Serafina, not out of obligation. I want to be clear about that. But because I had the ability to, and because she was the kind of person who wouldn't have expected it, which somehow made it feel more necessary. She had mentioned, in the way she mentioned most things, without drama, that she was coming up on a lease renewal and wasn't sure what to do, because rent had gone up again, and she'd been thinking about trying to buy something but the market was brutal. She had a daughter, 7 years old, the happiest kid I'd ever briefly encountered. And she was doing it alone because her husband had left about 2 years before. She didn't talk about it much. She didn't complain. She just kept showing up to things and driving out in ice storms and making sure her soup was hot before she sat down with it. I asked her on a Thursday morning over bad coffee if she'd be open to letting me help her with a down payment. I told her what I actually had. I watched her face go very still. She said, "Why are you telling me this?" I said, "Because you're the only person who knew and didn't turn into a different person." She cried a little. So did I. It was early and the coffee was bad, and we both had shifts starting in 2 hours and neither of us talked about it much more than that. But I helped her with the down payment. She bought a house in a neighborhood with a good school. Her daughter has a yard now. As for my family, I told them in April. I didn't do it with drama. I didn't make a speech or a scene. I met my mother for lunch and I told her what had happened, and I watched her face move through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, and then something that looked a lot like calculation, and then warmth that came just slightly too late to feel genuine. She said I should have told her sooner. I said I had my reasons. She said, well, what was I planning to do? And had I thought about helping my sister with that refinancing situation? And there was also the matter of Rhett's business which she'd heard about, and she just wanted to make sure I was being smart. Was I being smart? Had I talked to anyone? I let her finish. Then I said, as evenly as I could, that I remembered the ice storm and I remembered calling her from a ditch. And I remembered what she'd said. I wasn't angry. I just wanted her to know I remembered. She said that was different. I said I understood. And then I paid for lunch and I left. I had a similar, shorter conversation with my sister. And with Rhett. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I didn't need them to apologize. And I wasn't sure they were capable of the specific apology that would have mattered. I just let them know that I was aware, and that I was making my choices with that awareness in place. The requests slowed, but they didn't stop entirely. My mother still calls on Sundays. My sister still texts. Rhett surfaces seasonally. They are who they are. But the math has changed inside me. I know what I have, and I know who showed up, and I know those two facts are completely unconnected, which means they tell me something true. Serafina and I still get coffee on Thursdays. She's been in her house for almost a year now. Her daughter lost 2 teeth last month and apparently made 2 separate wishes, because she is 7 and optimistic in the way only 7-year-olds can sustain. I bought a house 3 streets over. I didn't plan it exactly. It just happened to be a good house at a reasonable price in a neighborhood I'd come to like. Serafina says I'm her favorite neighbor, and I say she's my only neighbor. I know, and she says that's the same thing. I still do nursing. I changed facilities. Better management, better hours, a team I actually like. The work is hard and it matters, and I'm good at it. And Winifred, wherever she is, was right, that's real work. I like to think she knew what she was doing when she chose me. I like to think she saw something. In those 20 minutes at a funeral reception when I was 24 and exhausted and still figuring out what my life was supposed to look like. I try to be worthy of it. Of the money, yes. I think about it carefully, spend it slowly, keep most of it in places where it will grow and be useful. But also of the decision she made. Of the quiet confidence of a woman who had spent her whole life doing real work and had decided, at the end of it, to hand something real to someone she believed could carry it. I think about her sometimes when I'm driving that stretch of Route 18. I think about the ditch and the ice and the way the hazard lights looked coming toward me through the sleet. I think about all the different ways a person can show you who they are. And I think about how simple it was in the end. Who came, who didn't. How little else there was to know. I used to think that loyalty was something people either had or didn't have, like eye color, fixed and inherited. I don't think that anymore. What I think now is that most people are loyal to whatever is convenient for them at the time, and they've simply never been tested under conditions that cost them anything. My mother loves me, in her way. My sister loves me, in her way. Rhett probably does too, somewhere underneath all that performance. But love that only shows up when the conditions are comfortable isn't really the thing I was looking for. I just didn't know that until a car went sideways on Route 18 and I had to find out, all at once, who was actually there. That night clarified something I'd been feeling for years but couldn't quite name. There's a version of caring that's really just proximity. People stay close because it's easy, because you share history, because leaving would take more energy than staying. And there's another version that costs something. That requires a person to get up, get in the car, drive into the dark, and not make you feel like a burden for needing them. Serafina didn't do what she did because she expected anything. She didn't even know about the money yet. I hadn't told her the transfer had gone through. She came because I texted and she decided, in about 90 seconds, that that was what you did. I think about the mechanics of that decision sometimes. How fast it was. How uncomplicated. No calculation. No weighing of inconvenience against obligation. Just, where are you? I'm coming. The hard part, the part I had to sit with for a long time, was accepting that I had spent years working to earn a place in my family that was never actually available to me. I had been reasonable and patient and accommodating, hoping that at some point the effort would register, that being good and quiet and undemanding would eventually produce a different result. It didn't, not because I failed, but because no amount of effort changes what a person is willing to give when giving is genuinely hard. You can't earn your way into someone's character. You can only watch what they do when it costs them. That's the thing about the ice storm. It wasn't a metaphor I constructed after the fact. It was just a night when everything got stripped down and simple. The road was icy, I was in a ditch, and I needed help. And what I found out, cleanly, without ambiguity, was exactly who I was to the people in my life. Winifred, I think, understood this. She lived alone for 40 years and left everything to a girl she'd spoken to for 20 minutes, because she had watched people her whole life and learned to read them quickly and accurately. She saw something real in those 20 minutes, and she trusted it. That kind of discernment, the ability to see people clearly and act on what you see, is something I'm still learning, but I'm learning it. I'm learning to stop extending credit to people who have never once made a payment. I'm learning that intelligence isn't just about what you know. It's about paying attention to what's actually in front of you and having the courage to believe it. I'm learning that a person with integrity doesn't announce it. They just show up. At midnight. In an ice storm, with their hazard lights on. Serafina's daughter lost 2 teeth last month. 3 streets over, a little girl is making wishes in a house with a yard. Because the right people ended up in the right places. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because at some point I stopped waiting for my family to become something they weren't, and I started paying attention to what was already true. That's the whole story, really. Not the money. The paying attention,